he's really he's shameless in intellectual argument. He's absolutely without character, a moral foundation, or even intellectual substance.
All right, hi everyone. We're back, and we have a very special guest today.
Jesus Christ!
I fucked it up already.
How have you not done that before?
Yeah.
True. This is not a gay podcast.
No, Ruben's straight, so it's not a gay podcast.
Yeah, it's not technically.
Low key, this guest is actually one of my dream guests, so I'm very excited to have her. Welcome to Angela Nagle, and thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. I can't believe I'm anyone's dream guest.
We have Freudian nightmares on this podcast all the
time.
Okay.
There's a gay man in Melbourne with a twinkle in his eye. Thanks.
Oh, that's so amazing. Thank you.
Okay, so now today we're discussing the Australian art critic Robert Hughes, specifically his wonderful BBC program and the companion book, The Shock of the New. This actually came about because I saw, Angela, you had posted about Hughes on your Substack, and it was actually around the same time that I finished a later book of his, which is Culture of Complaint. So Angela, it's destiny. So it's like, so I subscribed to Angela's Substack, obviously, and I was like, oh, we got to get Angela on. But before we move on to talking about The Shock of the New, I wanted to ask you, Angela, what you've been reading lately.
I've actually just been reading lots of Substack. There's so much of it coming in because I have the app and it comes in every morning. Like I spent hours already today just reading Substack stuff. So that's taking up a lot of my time. Books wise, the last thing I read, well, I'm not finished it yet. It's a book that I found in a secondhand store, which is a history of stained glass.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
And yeah, like it's one of those beautiful books that has all the pictures and everything. And I want to write something about this theme that I've noticed in it, which is kind of like looking at the history of stained glass through patronage. Because every different style change was actually brought about by a change in patronage. So you had this period of great cathedral building. And obviously, if you're building these enormous cathedrals, which have windows that run like the whole length of the building, that's going to be conducive to like having a whole huge epic narrative, made across the whole thing. And then it goes through kind of when, I guess, like the rise of capitalism or mercantilism, where rich families got stained glass artists to make stained glass for their homes. And so you actually had much smaller, but still portrayals of people. And often it was like the people who were paying for it, And then you go into Art Nouveau, which I think is my favorite period, but that was when you had like people moving into the cities, cosmopolitanism. It all becomes abstract, and it's used in these kind of beautiful modern buildings. So I just thought that was interesting because I kind of thought, like, I guess if you're interested in art, you kind of tend to think of it as being a product of like inspiration and the particular feelings or genius of the artist, but like patronage really is the driving force. I mean, artists will work within those parameters, but that will define like the styles of the period. So because at the moment, like the thing that I'm constantly thinking about is sort of why a lot of culture kind of sucks now, and I just
we
think
do
that
too, Angela.
Yeah, I think this is maybe a good way of understanding it, like what changed in the patronage models,
What changed, like, aesthetically, do you think, in terms, like, what does the book sort of say about that in terms of stained glass? Like, obviously, does it shrink in size because cathedrals are giant windows, obviously, and like
yeah, and it changed kind of the nature of what was being represented. Like if you think about it, if you have to do a stained glass for a cathedral and you've got this enormous vast space, like it's it's conducive to narrative, because you can actually portray an entire narrative going the whole way around. And if you look at some of that period, the great cathedral building, that's exactly what it does. There's a lot of detail, and you can follow the narrative like as you walk around. And then in the kind of great homes or whatever of the new rich, they were smaller, and they were moving towards abstraction. They weren't like narrative so much anymore. And even now, like, I mean, there's stained glass has become a very crafty kind of thing, like people do crafts in their homes. And so that's really small and really abstract. It'll just be like a small thing that you can hang on a window with like one shape on it kind of. So yeah, I mean, it's not like a person, if you think of a stained glass artist who made great like modern art nouveau style stuff, like it's not like that would have just occurred to them to make at any other time. You know what I mean? So that's why I keep thinking about if we're looking at like the crapness of contemporary culture and thinking about like how will it ever get better, I think that the starting point will probably be something to do with the patronage model.
So what you're saying is Theelbucks?
Yeah, exactly.
So what was the last fiction you read?
Oh,
can't remember.
God, that's terrible that I can't remember. It was probably Sally Rooney's book.
Oh my God. Like, do you actually like her, Angela, or?
I actually met Sally Rooney years ago.
Oh, really?
Her first book and my first book were coming out at the same time. And a friend of ours asked us to do a reading in it was a small little bar kind of thing. And, so she wasn't famous or anything at that point. And, she was very nice. I mean, like, she, we got along well in the very brief time that we had a conversation. And, I guess her style is not like my personal taste. Like, it's not really what I would look for in fiction. So, it's, I suppose it'd be kind of like asking me about like a fantasy novelist or something. It's not really my genre. So it's not something I understand that it has an appeal that just doesn't resonate with me personally, but it has an enormous appeal. I mean, like, she's kind of like one of the few really breakthrough, like big novelists. So yeah, I mean, there is also this thing where like the literary world has become very feminized, and so the kind of internal life of women has sort of become the center of fiction. The kind of fiction I think I probably have just a preference for a more masculine style of fiction. Like, I was thinking today about one of my favorite books, which is Philip Roth's American Pastoral.
Oh, Ruben will love the sound of that.
Yeah, I mean, you just never see novels like that anymore, and even like the kind of person, the kind of man who would write a novel like that is just totally vanished. So I think there's a place for the Sally Rooney stuff. It's not like, but there's also a place for Philip Roth, or there should be.
Yeah. That's sort of like foreshadowing a question I was going to ask you later, but I may as well ask it now. Like, and I don't know how connected you are to this, but what's the Irish literary scene like at the moment? Other than, I've promised not to say her name because she's she's our bête noire on this podcast. So,
just say the name.
Ms. Rooney.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Who you just mentioned. So, like, other than her, like, what's your kind of read on the Irish literary scene at the moment?
Well, because literature played this really significant role in Ireland historically, it gets very funded by the government. Basically, there's a lot of this writer I find really interesting, Desmond Fennell, who is Irish, like used to complain about this, that fiction writers like have this have all of this institutional support and funding, and no matter what they produced, it's sort of raved about in the media, whereas there's really no place in Ireland for sort of philosophy or just like nonfiction, basically, unless it's history. For the stuff for just like thinking about the world, that just there's no appreciation for it. There's no journals, there's no place for it whatsoever. And so Fennell was sort of saying that there's this official culture in Ireland where literature has this special role. And he used this phrase, whatever you say nothing. So it's all very uncontroversial, kind of everyone just celebrates each other all the time. And, it's just very, it's quite cliquish and kind of, you'd never see like people just like ripping each other's work to shreds or anything like that. It's all like a nice world of, it's feminine in its culture, right? It's all about sort of like everyone getting along and.
Oh, but the back channels.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's very similar in Australia. Like it's all the back patting, but like lots of people hate each other, and it's all yeah, it's pretty.
Oh yeah, we hate it when our friends become successful.
Yeah, and I think at some point we wanted to actually read Aima McBride. I don't know if you've read her, if you think you rate her or whatever.
No, I haven't actually.
Yeah. She's pretty experimental, I think, but which is good. It's better than blank, bloodless.
Not for real, but it'll be... I can't wait till we do that episode. It's gonna be great. This neo-modernist stuff. Right.
Yeah. But you mentioned Substack. What have you been reading on Substack? Give us some recommends.
So this morning I was listening to a short interview that Razib Khan, you know him?
Oh yeah. I think we used to follow each other on Twitter many moons ago.
What happened?
Oh, I think maybe he left or something. I don't know. Yeah.
He writes about genetics, and so he got in trouble with something to do with that. I can't remember exactly what it was. I think he got fired from the New York Times, or he somehow fell out with the New York Times, and it had something to do with that. But his stuff is really interesting, and it's he's like very it's very dense with research. Like he really researches things very well, and so I think he's great. He does the kind of stuff that I would be too lazy to ever do. So I appreciate like when people like that who are really hardworking will just condense these things for me. I also there's this book called Rethinking Sex, and that was being reviewed on a Substack called Lean Out with Tara Henley. Freddie DeBoer, I usually read his stuff. I'm actually just scrolling through my through my thing now. Ed West, he has a great one called Wrong Side of History.
Okay.
And Default Wisdom, I read that.
Oh yeah. I love her. She's great.
Yeah. So that's kind of gives you an idea.
Oh, cool. I literally subscribe to 2 Substacks, and it's now both guests that have been on this podcast.
Who's the other one?
Your good self, Angela, and River Page.
Ah,
But surely you subscribe to Alice as well.
Alice doesn't have a subscription thing.
Oh,
Sorry,
okay. That's you've been paid subscription. Okay.
Yeah. I think Substack's cool. And actually, most of our past guests, the last few episodes, have been Substack writers. So we're really mining Substack for content at this point.
yeah.
All right,
It's
cool.
definitely one thing I notice about how it has changed writing is definitely, just to go back to the feminine and masculine thing, there's definitely the rise of these like very like people who would have gone into policy think tanks and stuff, like people who will just do absolutely insane amounts of research, like these men who are just like really, really into research.
Autistic.
Like kind of Adam Tooze and like Richard Hanania and people like that. They'll they're just very good at like finding and assembling information and analyzing it very dispassionately and stuff like that. That's like a type of writer that I notice has really popped up on there,
Yeah, cool. Great suggestions. Have to go check them out.
Get them on the Substack to podcast pipeline.
All right. Okay. So Robert Hughes. Let's talk about Robert Hughes, who I love. I have like a non-sexual crush on. Like I don't find him sexually attractive, but I'm very like, I just love him so much. He's dead now though, so nothing's ever gonna
Thanks for
happen.
Austere.
That's the only thing that stops you, right?
Yeah, that's the only thing that's stopping me. But honestly, I think Robert Hughes is like one of Australia's greatest cultural exports. And it's funny because he was associated with a thing that was called the Sydney Push in, I think it was like the 50s, 60s, and 70s, which was like basically thinkers and writers and artists and stuff that used to go to the pub, very Australian, and just hang out and have like a salon sort of thing. And it was sort of like an intellectual subculture. Jermaine Greer, Clive James is a part of it. A couple of other like fairly famous like emigres, I guess. Is emigre the word for people who go out? I'm a writer.
Yeah, I think so.
We can all
I think so. I think so.
Whatever.
Yeah. So politically, the group was sort of all over the shop, but I think it was sort of vaguely left libertarian, which is a formulation you don't hear much about anymore, I don't think. But they were all sort of like, I guess, anarchistic-y, like, but like Jermaine and Clive, Clive James, like Jermaine. I've been drinking. Sorry.
There was a documentary about them made by Howard Jacobson.
Oh, really?
Did you ever see it? I'll send it to you. It's
Oh.
He made a documentary about that group of people coming to London and
Oh, wow.
New York, I think.
Because Robert Hughes went to New York, whereas Clive and Jermaine went to London, I think.
Yeah.
But
and there was the other one too. Oh my God. What's his name? He played like a woman character.
Barry Humphries.
Barry Humphries.
Yeah.
I actually read Barry Humphries' autobiography once.
Yeah. Oh, really? Was it good?
It was hilarious.
Yeah,
it was really funny.
Yeah. I didn't know he was associated with that. That's cool.
Yeah, he was in this documentary. He knew them.
Oh, okay. But yeah, all of those people I think like felt at the time they had to immigrate because, Australia was a very culturally enclosed place at the time. So I think that's the context he kind of comes out of. But at the same time, I think Robert Hughes is probably the one with the chilliest reception here. Would you guys agree? Like in
what way? You mean chilly?
in the sense that Robert Hughes isn't sort of celebrated in the same way that like Jermaine is, for instance. Like even though people have their problems with Jermaine, like she'll
I feel like
come
none
up.
of them are really anymore, though, right? I
Yeah.
feel like they've all been sort of like disowned. I feel like I feel like people don't talk about Hughes that much anymore, but at the very least, they can say that uh, I feel like a book like The Fatal Short has definitely not got a chilly reception, but like maybe his like other cultural kind of criticism has. Whereas like I feel like the general public probably quite likes Clive James, and when he died, like the rise in sales from his books and the people who just wanted to go back and read unreliable memoirs was like quite a lot. But in terms of like think pieces and that sort of thing, that sort of more media type discourse around him, people did not like him at the end at all, and just saw him as like a climate change or a climate denialist apologist writing. He wrote like a ton of poems for Quadrant.
Clive James or
Clive James, yeah.
Oh yeah, Clive James. Yeah.
What was that, Rio?
I was going to say, based on the fact of what I'm imagining is that Hughes maybe just inspired less deep connection to his work. That's not necessarily a bad thing. People feel very personal about Germaine Greer's work, so irrelevant of what she's saying or thinking, they will have a reaction. Whereas, Hughes has quite a even keeled description, although his personality is mixed in there, so he could, go off the deep, or the deep end or the shallow end, saying whatever he liked, and his work would still hold up.
Yeah, I feel like Greer and James as well probably came back to Australia more, both in terms of like literally coming back to Australia more, but also they wrote more about Australia. Like, I mean, Hughes had like The Fatal Shore, but after that, most of his stuff was more like about American type cultural politics, or just general like art history type appreciation. Like, I guess there are some, like there's this book on Australian art as well, but I guess that just talks to a small audience than literary criticism or poetry or that kind of writing does, versus Greer's kind of like political sort of writing or gender theory stuff. So I guess maybe it's just in that smaller camp or smaller audience. He died early. He died earlier than those two. Greer's still alive, right?
Yeah. I think he died in 2012, if I remember correctly. I think maybe later. Sorry, I should have fact checked that. Oh well.
We don't have facts in this podcast.
Yeah, that's true. Like facts,
just feelings.
Yeah, just feelings. Feelings don't care about your facts. So yeah, Clive James actually. Just a side note. I remember when they did one of those packages, when someone dies, and there was a scene, like footage of him like reading this poem about him describing the sun in Sydney and how much he missed it because he couldn't travel back because he was too ill. And like, that is so true, because when you go to other places, the sun is different. Like, it feels different, it looks different. And the way he kind of described it in his poetry was actually really, really amazing. I almost cried.
I've actually been to Sydney once.
Yes, you were here for the Festival of Dangerous Ideas, weren't you?
That was my main memory of it, that I was just totally like blinded by the sun.
Yay.
Yeah, it felt amazing, actually. I remember thinking it would be so strange to live somewhere this bright all the time.
The real reason is that the sun shines out of all of our asses simultaneously at once.
But I also think, like, in terms of Hughes' reception here, he actually did come back to Australia quite a lot because he loved to come and fish over here and stuff. He loved fishing. And that's something we'll get to as well when we talk about him being a real man's man. But I think his work dealt with things in, I guess, because it's modern art, it's very abstract and sort of effete. And maybe that's not as, I don't know, kind of doesn't align as much with Australian culture. So maybe like, whereas Germaine, at least, she's a feminist, but like is mouthy and like can like get in front of and like making outrageous statements and things like that. And Clive is really funny. Like, you know what I mean? Like maybe that's something to do with it.
Historically as well, I mean, you mentioned this before, like one of the reasons why they wanted to sort of immigrate or get out of Australia is that one, Australian culture at the time was very not modernist. It was like very insulated, and like Australian modernism basically just didn't happen. It didn't exist, particularly like in a literary sense. But but also maybe it existed more in terms of like in the art world, but in terms of literature, we didn't have a modernism. It was just like weird Victorian romanticism or classicism, basically. Or that they took like that version of T.S. Eliot and sort of like really mixed it more with Matthew Arnold. That's the kind of classicism you got with like James Macaulay and those kind of figures. And the modernism you do get with like Patrick White doesn't really happen until like late 50s, early 60s, really, in terms of its mainstream impact. And even then, you really don't really get that much at all. It's very weird.
Yeah, so I've always found that strange. And also, of course, there is the controversy around blue poles. Do you know about this controversy, Angela?
No.
So this Blue Poles by Jackson Pollock is actually owned by the National Gallery of Australia. And it was
about this.
it was bought by Gough Whitlam, our only kind of commie prime minister. Not really, but and it was bought for $1.3 million, and that was like the highest price for a piece of art until later.
And this is back in 1973.
Yeah. And Hughes was instrumental in making this happen because Hughes loved Jackson Pollock, as you can tell from the documentary. But yeah, and that caused a giant controversy because everyone was like, why are you spending this much money on a painting? So yeah, that was an interesting, maybe that's got something to do with Hughes's reputation or image here.
He does have a slightly aloof quality.
Yes. Yeah.
He comes across as like a type of Australian man who doesn't really exist anymore, which is this like austere gentleman of the bush. Like it's like a remnant of colonization. He's retained or at least he's rediscovered his English gentlemanness, but there's kind of this funny, rugged Australianism about him. I think there's a similar element in like Kate Blanchett, bizarrely, but it doesn't really exist. I say that in Kate Blanchett.
You got to explain this.
You have to explain it. Kate Blanchett gives me nothing from the bush. There's no ruggedness in Kate Blanchett. She has theatre voice. She pronounces all her T's like very precisely.
Yes.
Nothing rugged about that, Rio.
But it's like she's like this, but she's saying it with this like weird artifice. Like no one from Australia naturally sounds that like beautiful. The way that Blanchett like appears. I don't know. Look, maybe I'm wrong. But to me, there's a quality of like you weren't born speaking that beautiful. You had to like claw your way to this.
Oh yeah, like a refinement. Yeah, I see what you're getting at.
Claw your way into this refinement, and that's what Hughes is giving to me.
I for one will definitely advocate for Kate Blanchett to play Robert Hughes in the upcoming biopic.
Hey, she played Bob Dylan, so she could do it.
Yeah, I that is true though. There is a slightly like a affected Englishness kind of there with Hughes, and I can definitely see that. Like he even sort of you could see him being one of these like people like traveling the empire kind of in like linen.
Yeah, and I think that probably, I don't know how, that's probably got something to do with his education and how education was very English back when he was coming up, but also the BBC as well. I wonder if like presenters had to do the whole RP thing when they were presenting, because you can still tell his accent is Australian, but it's this weird mix of like half Australian, half Queen Elizabeth. And my favorite thing about the way he speaks as well is how he pronounces sibilant sounds. Like he like elongates the S. I love it. It's so good.
Mm. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, yeah.
Like every time he did it, I just got my jollies. It was so great.
As a complete side note, this is only going to be interesting for Australian listeners. I just remembered that I saw this earlier. I was coming to check something about Hughes's biography. But Hughes's niece is Lucy Turnbull, like Malcolm Turnbull's wife.
What? No,
Yeah.
Jesus Christ,
Yeah.
fucking hell.
Our former prime minister, yes, yeah, yeah. So
Anyway, so this is a side note.
bit of trivia there.
Yeah, a bit of trivia.
Okay, so the show itself then. So I saw this ages ago when I was still an undergrad, and I had to hire the DVDs from the library. DVDs. This is how old I am. And to me, it sort of really opened up modern art to me because it contextualized it in a way that, because I did a few art history electives, and it always seemed a bit, to me anyway, kind of choppy in that here's a period, here's another period. Whereas his kind of program just gives you a really nice narrative through line, and it has a perspective, and he prosecutes that perspective, and in a way that I just didn't get from my education, which I found really appealing. Like it really filled in the gaps, I felt. How about everyone else? What's our history with this program?
None. I've meant to read The Fatal Shore for a while. I have a copy of his book on Australian art, but and the Cultures of Complaint, which I feel like is the kind of writer I feel like I should have read a while ago, because I feel like a lot of the kind of interest that I have are kind of concurrent with his own, but I just never have. So it was kind of it was good to sort of engage with that, I guess.
It kind of has the feeling of the way Camille Paglia would always say it was better when education was structured around survey courses that were these really broad, sweeping ones. And yeah, I do think that sometimes when you have someone who can approach such a big topic, such a broad topic, and sweep the whole way across it with a sort of, not like personal essay, but they're putting their own perspective in as well. Like they can find certain narrative threads there that are really interesting that you wouldn't get if you just picked apart all the various bits, and looked at them alone.
And I feel like academics these days as well are just afraid of having a perspective. Like it's like any perspective they have has to be vetted through like 1,000 peer review citations or something like that. It's like, no, just give us like what you think. Like, I don't see why lecturers and academics can't do that. Like just say, here's what I think about this, but here are some other thoughts, like.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like endless nitpicking,
Yes.
And the problem is that now that the kind of nitpickers have ascended to the point where they will just kill any original thought. I mean, you have to have the freedom to just kind of run with an idea that's not, that you're maybe intuiting or something like that, and especially given that it's art, it's not science. He was able to bring this perspective that like a nitpicker just never could, Yeah,
it's like I feel like the academic transition has been from criticism to scholarship now, and then those are two like completely different or separate kind of practices, and most of like academic writing is entirely scholarly based, hence you need to sort of have people doing the fact checking, the peer reviewing, where the goal is truth, not like assessment or judgment in some way. And I think like Hughes definitely seems like to have benefited from not having that academic background as well. And he's like quite wide and generalist sweep. Like you don't really see someone writing like a key narrative history of Australian convict or colonialism. And also like writing an awful lot about art in its various forms. Like that's just two almost like diametrically opposed type things. I can't think of any one off the top of my head, particularly in Australia anyway, who would have that kind of reach or range at the moment.
But isn't that's influenced by like the academy in the sense, because the modern academy is all about hyper specialization rather than
atomization.
You never really have a great generalist like in universities, and that is like such a shame because and like you said, Angela, like it's the Palia's point is actually I sort of fully agree with it actually, is that no one can teach those survey courses because no one actually has the knowledge to teach it, because they're all
it's
like,
very it's also very ironic though as well, because one of the main catch cries of like modern academia for the last like 10 or so 15 years has been I can't think of the term, like interdepartmental sort of like like that sort of stuff, right? And like there's a really like a heavy emphasis on like the term like the interrelationships between different kinds of like the intersections between politics and literature or whatever it is, but it even that feels atomized as well. It's like usually it'll mean like getting one person from one department to come and talk with one person from another department, or they might like co-write articles or something like that. And there's that sort of like that interrelationship done on that sort of level,
putting together a team.
Like putting together a team or something like that, rather than like the individual person having to know it and to write about it like themselves. It's a very like different kind of mindset. Very strange. Well, you know, if we need to get someone to I feel like the particular way like most universities or most courses are run now, if you do have that kind of more broad sweep, it's not the one person teaching the unit, it's like 7 different people teaching the unit from their own specialties.
So I think he's got a lot of breadth. So like people sort of say he's a bit of a generalist, but I also think there's a lot of depth there. And again, I think the depth comes from his perspective. So he's clearly got a lot of knowledge of the history of modern art, but like when he kind of delves deep, it's like he pursues a particular avenue of, you know, inquiry or something, and that's where you get the depth from.
And the kind of spirit of the age, you know, is very much, that's kind of what it's about, you know. But it's not just, and like how do you you know, quantify such a thing, you know? But he captures it for sure. The excitement element of it, you know, the newness, the movement, the kind of the sense that like there are all these possibilities opening up. That's like really comes across. You can really sort of feel what it was like to be around at the time that these things were being made, you know.
Yeah, and the absurdity of certain things. Like I remember, I think it's in the first episode where he's talking about this kind of glorification of the machine, and I don't know if he talks about he does talk about the futurists in the first episode, doesn't he? Yeah. Talking about the futurists and other people, and then he references this sculpture. I think it's in Paris, which is a sculpture of a car, and like reflects on the fact at like how weird that is. Like it's already an object, like a 3D. And they're just rendering it in stone.
And it also kind of makes me think of how like styles today that sort of try to imitate the avant-garde at that time don't really make any sense, because they're not avant-garde anymore, and they're not the historical context that produced those things. It wasn't necessarily optimism. It could be like absolute terror or total optimism, but it was a sense of like something, you know, we're in the middle of this enormous change, and you know, everything is possible, good and bad, sort of. And so, you know, the even like the more conceptual stuff, when that's kind of imitated today, like that context is missing, you know, and it's sort of just like, it's become just like verbiage, you know, it's just like the conceptual is like an excuse to write about art, and not really like for the art itself to be that important.
And sometimes it's literally writing, you know, when you've got these artists who just like write words on a wall and
yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of the which episode did we respond to the most? Like, you got the most out of? Like, I'm sorry to like ask such a like basic question, but like I just think it's a fun question.
It's a fun icebreaker. You know?
It's a fun icebreaker.
Yeah.
I really connect with this episode 7. I think that's where he's talking about like pop art and American art. I think those last 2 episodes were really good. The questions he asked, where he's describing the end or the beginning of postmodernism or whatever. And I'm like, wow, we're literally still asking the same question 40 years later. Yeah, how does art survive in like a post-nature capitalist world? Like, how are we? Sorry, I hadn't thought this answer out. But those questions that he's asking, the fact that we're still asking them now, I find that really depressing. What is modern art? Like, when he was describing performance art and basically calling it worthless, as someone who I don't really have connection to Robert Hughes, but my first much older boyfriend, when I was a teenager, took me to a fuckload of art galleries till I was sick of it. But that was my art education, and I was like, I'm gonna do performance art because that seems fun. And so that's really been my only connection to the art world, is performance art. And then to kind of have Hughes be like, performance art was attempting to answer or to engage with that idea of like, if art can't express the natural world anymore, can our bodies do it? And no, like the answer is no. What's next? What the fuck's next? But he the way that he does it in a not entirely pessimistic way, I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, it seems more like a formal argument. It's just like, no, it's not like a political point or just saying it's bad because I just don't like this kind of art. It's like, no, it's bad because it just can't formally do what it's trying to do.
There we go.
Like,
Thank you.
An intentional point.
Thank you for saying that better than me.
I'm just kind of surprised that you did performance art.
I'm not.
I didn't. Oh no, I'm not surprised. I didn't know. But like, what was it? Were you like naked in a car park, screaming, like reciting Mein Kampf through loudspeakers or something?
Oh well, it wasn't in a car park, but I got everyone to. I've done quite a bit. I've done a bit of performance art. The most recent one was I did whiteface.
Oh,
painted my face white. I got everyone to hold hands in a circle and start humming a hymn of my people's culture, which was Bittersweet Melody by
what was in it? The Verve?
Yeah, the Verve, there we go.
Yeah.
People didn't realize what it was doing. It was very fun. I was being anti-racist.
We'll put that up on the Patreon one day, maybe.
And that was Nick.
If you donate enough money, he will do that for you at your house.
Anyway, Angela, what was your favorite episode, or like which one you responded to the most?
I think the one on architecture. There was. Which was about like the international style and Le Corbusier and stuff like that. I really like that one. And I also liked it seems like the arc of it begins with utopianism and ends with sort of the
Brasilia.
Yeah, it ends with actually. Oh, let me see. I'm just looking up the titles of the episodes, and the final one
you
is
mean
called
the whole show? Yeah.
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 The final episode is called "The Future That Was."
Yes. Yeah.
End of modernity in brackets. The commercialization of modern art, and it goes into that. So it starts with that mechanical theme where everything is future oriented and being swept away by all of this like technological progress and so on, and then it ends with that. So like with that in mind, it is sort of a it is sort of pessimistic in a way, like, because if you're ending that period of optimism with like Hockney and stuff like that, if that's the point at which you ended, then we're way beyond that now. And I think also there is like a kind of implicit conservatism to this as well, because even though he appreciates modern art in a way that conservatives typically would not, they would dismiss it. There is a sense that he's sort of already putting the future behind us.
Yeah, like it's funny because sometimes people do say that he's kind of conservative, but like you just have to reorient what you think conservative art, like appreciation of art, is, because he's not like a Roger Scruton. Like he's not like, ancient styles and all that sort of stuff. Like he appreciates some elements of modern art, but it's like he's with qualifications. Appreciation with qualification. Yeah.
Conservatism, you're right, is the wrong way of looking at it. It's more just like discriminating. Like he's making distinctions. He's not just saying like everything, that all art that is sort of modern and like progressive in a sense is all one thing. He's sort of saying it reached this great peak and then it fell. And that if you have the capacity for distinction, you can tell the difference. Like you're not just going to think, any old crap, like sort of that calls itself or that like, tries to like visually reference this period of a peak is not the same thing. Like, so a person making, really derivative like art that is just referencing 100 years ago is not the same as the artist who actually did it 100 years ago.
I sort of view him as a kind of like a classicist, but not like really. I feel like that term doesn't like quite denote him. But I feel like if I think of someone as a conservative, having a kind of conservative aesthetic understanding, it's very much an idea that art has some sort of moral place in the universe, which he like explicitly says like many times throughout, that art does not morally improve you, and that he himself is evidence of that. Which is one of the
I love that bit.
Yeah. And we were like, so for the conservative, like art is something that has a fairly strong relationship to the moral fabric of society. Therefore, like a work can be aesthetically terrible or aesthetically damaging or degenerative if it is pushing against the sort of the fabric that holds us all together, whether that's like from a Christian perspective or whatever perspective it might be. Whereas like, I don't think he doesn't have that. He just has like a his conservatism is entirely like formal, not moral or ethical. It's like it's entirely aesthetic, in that he's sort of but even that I feel like conservative is not like the right. Yeah, it just doesn't fit. It's like you think conservative is like entirely looking backwards, and he's not looking backwards. He kind of is looking forwards to a certain extent, except that he doesn't see. He has much more of an appreciation for the classical understanding of like technique and style and craftsmanship, and sort of artistic form that a lot of like, well, he says anyway, like a lot of like postmodern art just doesn't have, because it wants to be more uniform. And I feel like the most interesting part of the show's arc that you touched on, that this movement from sort of futurism and the idea of like the technological future to the contemporary, which is sort of just like the future manifest in a sort of weird way, is that they are distinctly connected in their arcs. And that he talks about how the interest in technology is sort of this sublime futurist speed type manifesto understanding of it is entirely connected with the Henry Ford-esque sameness, right?
Yeah.
And then that comes out particularly in the architecture episode where like things just become the utopianism becomes dystopic when it becomes that everything must be the same, everything must be uniform, because that's the best way to get it off the production line, right? And then it becomes consumerist or whatever it is. And I think that he understands that those two things are sort of like ironically interlocked, which I don't think gets mentioned enough today, maybe.
I think he also had a really, I mean, this is one thing I appreciate about him a lot, which is that I think he had a sense that like the thing that you should, that is worth cultivating in yourself is the ability to judge art and not to, just be told like because something is fashionable or has high market value or something like that, that you should be able to judge things yourself, and also sort of not to be the imposition of politics into art to the extent that kind of everything becomes like a political judgment, like, or I think he also didn't like that because I think he had a sense that like the thing that you should cultivate in yourself is an appreciation of the past and the potential of the future, that you shouldn't have to make like a political choice between these two things. That's like a really bad way to look at culture.
It's like a false dichotomy, right? You don't have to conflate the two things. And I think what he teaches or what he sort of advocates for is not just like that you have to learn aesthetic judgment, but it's more important, like in some sort of like idealized sense, like being able to like judge between like one or two things. But I think he importantly understands the reason why you do that, and that is a cultivation of the self as a subject who perceives things in the world. The better that you can, you can train your aesthetic perception or your aesthetic sense is good for you as an individual because it gives you pleasure, but it also gives you an understanding of yourself in a way that you wouldn't have otherwise, right? And that might have a political dimension in some aspects, but it's not tied to the political in any sense. It gives you a sense of both your place within history, but also your place within the present, and then your place potentially within the future as well. Which I think that, there's someone who like teaches at a university in relation to literature, and I'm sure Matt has the same sort of perspective. We don't teach that anymore. You rarely ever, you teach students, if they're lucky, how to maybe aesthetically understand a novel or a poem or whatever it is. But I feel like you very rarely ever teach them why it is they're learning this or why it's important. Or if you do teach them, it's something abstract like, well, it's important because you can understand how people lived in a previous time, or something like completely separate from the actual individual themselves. And you don't really teach them that, no, we want you to learn how to appreciate art because it makes the art more pleasurable and more sensual, or even sometimes more erotic for you, right? You don't teach that anymore in classes. Like, you can try to, but it's like, it's become muted. It's become uniform because that's the way you have to teach, or that's the way you have to criticize things. It has to be, is this thing sort of, does this thing have value based upon some sort of really uniform level of judgment, rather than a judgment that has a basis in a deep sense of history and that deep survey sense that we talked about before as well. I think that's also like the other aspect that's lost. There's that arc of judgment that's lost, rather than the thing needs to be isolated into its own individual time. Whereas what Hughes does is to show how everything is sort of distinctly connected or interrelated in some way.
Yeah, you mentioned Roger Scruton earlier. One thing I think that is very appealing about Hughes that is sort of missing in Scruton is that if you look up at like the Scruton's famous stuff on beauty, the initial case that he makes is very good and is very true. But at the end, the conclusion is sort of like, we should just like live in mock Tudor villages or something. You know what I mean? There's no sense that like,
which is completely kitsch.
yeah, but there's no sense that like all of these styles were breakthroughs in their time. Like you can't tell creative people that like, oh, this is, everything modern is going to be crap, or everything new is going to be crap. So you may as well just imitate the past. That's just like, that's never going to be of interest to creative people, and it's just way too pessimistic. I mean, so I think that in doing this kind of thing about modern art, Hughes is sort of just like really mastering that sense of like, this is my judgment. Like I can tell the difference between a piece of modern art that is good and a piece of modern art that is bad, and the modernness of it is not sort of the point, or it's not like, how I arrive at a judgment. And also the idea that like, modern art can also be in the past in some sense. Like at this point, like, the stuff that he's looking at is very old now, really. And so, you can see it in its context, and, you can see that there are these moments of like a bursting forth of like great creative energy where just an extraordinary amount of great stuff gets produced. And that energy burns out at a certain point. But Hughes leaves open the possibility of a new like moment like that to arrive, which I like.
Although if you watch the new Shock of the New, which is the sequel to it, where he basically confronts Jeff Koons, which is like, it's my favorite bit. Because
it's so good.
Yeah, Jeff Koons is basically, I actually don't mind Jeff Koons. Like, I think like people like Robert Hughes are a bit hard on him. Like some of his stuff is like I kind of get it. Like it's the whole pop art thing, and I get it for what it is. But like when he's face to face with Jeff Koons, and he's like, Jeff Koons makes some reference. I think it's to what's the painting? I can't remember who the artist is, but it's Adam and Eve being ejected from Eden.
Yeah.
And he's like making this reference, and then Robert Hughes like, no, like and just saying like, no, that's not the right way to use the reference. So like in that sense, I get that kind of conservative point of view there, but also Jeff Koons is kind of full of shit at the same time. So like.
Yeah. And he there is a very anti-bullshit kind of like, that's very Australian, isn't it, though?
Yes.
Yeah. Like he's just like, I'm not impressed. Like, I don't care how much this thing is worth.
Come
like,
on, mate.
But that's also the great value of that, of imparting that kind of a like educational ethos, right? Of cultivating your own ability to judge things. Because it doesn't matter how much, as I say, the painting is worth. It doesn't matter how much institutional backing something has. If you have cultivated that in yourself, even if you are nobody, if you have none of those things, you have no institutional power or whatever, you still have that capacity, within you, which is like a great power in a way, to have.
Yes,
the
definitely.
confidence, to do that.
Yeah. Definitely.
He's walking around in his walking stick in that revisited documentary.
So good.
Yeah, but I suppose like there's one way of looking at it, which is that it's conservative, right? He's unimpressed, or he's unimpressed by sort of newfangled things. Like that's kind of the way it comes across. But he's also kind of just saying like, I know what good modern art is, and this isn't it, And he's which kind of makes you think, well, there will be another kind of bursting forth of like new like creative energy, but it's not going to be in this world, because this is just institutionally captured and deadened by all these forces now. It will be the equivalent of the early modern artists who were avant-garde and rule breaking and kind of like came out of nowhere, in the sense of like from where people didn't expect.
The
It reminds me. I was going to say, it reminds me. There's a quote in I can't remember if it's the second episode or the third episode or one of those early ones. And it's a perfect example of that exact point, but also just uses like excellent wit as well. Where he riffs on the old line of Walter Pater's that like all art aspires to the condition of music, and he says, as far as today's politics is concerned, art aspires to the condition of music. It provides the background hum for power. And then like just straight out, it's like right at the end of the episode, and then straight after that as well, he just sort of like muses on the fact that that one, like art can't save any lives and doesn't like do anything like that. Like pragmatically, it can't do anything like that. It's functionally useless from that perspective. But the contrast between the sort of the modernist period and our own period is that the modernists falsely believed that they could use art to save lives, at least in some sort of to some extent. Of course, like that sort of would vary depending on the modernist artist, but there was that kind of ethos that art could matter and did matter. Whereas today, like, and he says, like, our loss is the fact that we don't have that capacity because we're too cynical about what art's capacity is, and that like art, or at least the true spirit of modernist art, was that hopeless hope that art could actually do something or change something because art mattered. And what I kind of found weird as well about I don't think he didn't really mention this at all, which I kind of found odd, particularly in those like first two episodes when he's talking about futurism and the impact of technology on art forms during that period. He mentions the phonograph and like the capturing of sound, but he doesn't really mention photography, particularly like as a materialist point around like why artists transition from just trying to hold up a mirror to nature and have to like try to do something deeper or more psychologically interesting or more formally expansive, because it's a materialist point, right? I mean, once you have photography, there's no point doing that. Or it's the same with like literature and cinema, right? It goes beyond like a pure like narrative aspect to being something more formally inventive.
Well, it's interesting because
and nowadays it's like that's even more the case, right?
But it's interesting because I think it was actually in your piece, Angela, when I think you were referencing something that Jermaine Greer said about like him mourning the death of painting. And it's it's interesting that he didn't go there though, like to talk about photography, because essentially photography, it's very reductive, but photography is the executioner of painting, right?
Yeah.
Like from this point of view.
Well, at least from,
what
like,
Jermaine
of
Greer
landscape
said
painting
is,
anyway, right?
Sorry.
what Jermaine Greer said is he never got over the death of painting. So like he just couldn't accept that it was over. And so he just, so that sort of like maybe is what she was getting at, that he couldn't sort of accept that this was maybe a technological inevitability in some way.
When he was talking about current Ruben was just saying this, current artists, or so modern painters, modernists falsely believe that their art could change the world or whatever, and contemporary artists don't. We now know that was false. All I could think about that entire time was young adult writers and representation politics.
Well, it's history
like,
repeating.
No, contemporary artists do believe that their art do believe that their art can absolutely change the world. We are once again
as fast, right? The people who believe art can change the world are the worst people who believe the people who don't want to change the world. I mean, of course, like at least like there are many things you disagree with a lot of the politics of the modernist period, depending on like which particular school it is. But at least it was exciting and actually meaningful to a certain extent, even if it was destructive or chaotic. Today it's fucking it's pencil pushing. Like at the end of the day, it's like it's over the stuff that doesn't really matter that much at all. Right.
Well,
it's not about like the overthrow of government. It's not the overthrowing of government or the destroying of the past or anything like that, or the whatever the futurist desire is. It's much more of a, mate, you better be careful about the kind of things you represent in your artwork, man. You really better be careful.
Ruben, you matter, and that's all that matters.
Oh no, Rio, you matter. Your future matters.
Thank you. I think that's art. I think that what you brought today is art.
I mean, this is a kind of performance art, right? Podcasting.
Oh, definitely.
It's the death of art, really. I mean, if anything's going to kill off art, it's this.
We forgot we didn't create anything because we were all just podcasting through the entire decade.
Look, we just needed a break.
Someone can make an audio collage.
Yeah. And I also think too, like looking at this, you kind of think like, what would be the new avant-garde? Like this is kind of just the thing that I always think about now. And there is this conversation going on in the world of cinema and different things that basically like the political climate has sort of killed creativity. And some people say, I've heard anecdotes of like a movie script gets thrown in the garbage because there's something not like, politically correct about it or something like that. But I definitely think it's deeper than that. I don't think there are masterworks being produced and they're all just being thrown in the bin. I think like something has just been profoundly shut down in the imagination that was awakened in the period that he goes through at the beginning of this series, So I'm often wondering about like, what will it be that will jumpstart that again, if it does happen.
And will we see it? Because the thing about it is that because there is so much crap being produced, and I don't mean crap as in judgmentally, I just mean lots of crap is being produced, that there may be like some avant-garde out there, but it may never rise to a sort of prominence that it did in the modern art period, because there's so much other, in scare quotes, content out there drowning all this out. So, perhaps it already exists, but, you've got to be able to find it.
Absolutely. And this is why, like a critic, when you asked me to do this, I was kind of thinking like, there is something strange about talking about a critic of art. Like, you know what I mean? You're like twice removed from
we were talking about this before you came on.
But actually, critics and enablers of various types are actually so incredibly important. Like there's a book that's just come out about the 1980s kind of literary scene in London. And this would have been like Hanif Qureshi, Salman Rushdie, David Lodge, what's his name? Martin Amis, all those characters. And the author was kind of central in basically turning this into like a vibrant scene, because he was like he didn't succeed as a novelist himself, but he kind of just became like somebody who found great stuff and brought it together and wrote about why it was great and kind of brought it to the attention of everyone. And and even like a little while ago on Substack, I was looking through all these interesting figures who wrote about economics in the 19th century who were sort of making the case for what Eric Reinert calls the other canon of economics. So it's sort of like basically the idea that you have to have like industrial policy, right? That like there's like, why is it that some countries that have abundant resources can be poor and others that have none can be very wealthy? They began to think about all these things. So he starts with one Antonio Serra at the end of the Renaissance, and then it kind of moves around the world at different times: Germany, Japan, America. But one of the things I noticed when I was looking at all these figures is they always had somebody who brought them to the attention of, like, their works would have either never been produced or nobody would have ever read them if they didn't have another person there who helped that text to be printed, and then who brought it to the attention of somebody in a position of influence. So in the case of Antonio Serra, I mean, he wrote his work, which is considered like a really seminal work of political economy. He wrote it from prison, and the publisher that published it also published a load of texts that were banned by the church. So that publisher, who, I mean, I can't even remember his name now, if it weren't for him, there are all of these great works that would never have been known. And so that's what kind of really worries me about the closing down of just interesting people with an edge of disagreeability about them that makes them unusual or makes them find interesting things, and sort of non-conformists in some way. Like you have to have those people in the kind of gatekeeping roles.
And also,
right?
Sorry. Yeah, go.
No, go ahead.
Also, in terms of the aesthetic world, like they need to have taste, like a very strong sense of taste, because the thing is that like all these people who are gatekeeping now, their sense of taste is like, is conflated the right word, or it's reduced to ideological questions and like concerns and things like this. How is this going to play, sort of thing? Like, no, is it good? Is it beautiful? Is it sublime? It's like I know that's sort of like, I don't know, is that naff? They should have these qualities, and they don't. Like, this is an institutional problem.
And then you also have like the inverse issue as well, which is I think maybe more of an issue in this country anyway, where those people who maybe make that defense of I don't know, classical understandings about like art's place in the world they also don't have taste as well. Right? It's like the kind of like the conservative defenders of like canonical standards, whether it's in the art world or if it's in like literature, it's just the most boring basic takes you can possibly have about the canon. It's like art isn't just like it doesn't just go from fucking like Da Vinci through to Picasso and like Monet, and like there are like many different like vibrancies to it. And I think like Hughes's taste is and maybe it's one of the reasons what doesn't make it conservative, is that it's really varied, right? And like having taste is not just understanding why you like one particular thing, but is understanding that there are many different kinds of forms of valid art that can be there is no there's no one normative understanding of art, but there are like multiple normative understandings of art, right? And one can appreciate satire in the same way that one can appreciate classical romance or something like that, right? And I think you don't get that much anymore. It has to be like the same kind of fiction that gets appreciated like over and over and over again, or the same kinds of art, whether it's from like the same kind of ideological perspective, but also maybe more importantly, or maybe more worryingly, it's the same kind of aesthetic perspective. I think that's actually more like damaging than the long term. Like the ideological stuff that fades through time, right? Politics does like sort of fade away, but the aesthetic stuff is maybe more odd or strange.
Because
sorry, go.
Yeah, I was just going to say the reason that what the quality that Hughes has is so important and is so needed is that as you say, the ideologies will come and go like fashions basically. But if the people who are in the tastes making, if you like, roles, these like enabler is the wrong word because it's like what they say about alcoholics friends, but those people that help that can find great work, and like a great a creative person might not have any talent for like self-promotion or knowing, and they might have that disagreeable personality that makes them very bad at like networking and get, all that kind of stuff. So they need that person to find their work and bring it into the spotlight. And if you have populated all of the, the art world, the literary world, with people whose only way of judging whether something is good is that other people think it's good, you're never going to find anything of value, like by definition, So even if, let's say, we go through some big conservative backlash, right, and the woke stuff goes away, that problem will still be there, because the people who will be in those roles will be conformists who only can judge the aesthetic value of something by do other people think it's good? Do people in power think it's good? Do the institutions tell me it's good? That is just a total disaster. I mean, I think that's like the biggest problem in a way, because even if you're a creative person, like, that if you're doing something that is different, like, who are you even speaking to? You know what I mean? Because that there's this wall of hostility there in front of you,
And that's, I think we're actually on a cultural precipice, what you're describing there in the sense of the backlash. Because I don't know how you feel about this, Angela, but I feel like there is a bit of a backlash in motion to all this stuff. But I feel like there is a danger there that, yeah, it's good to get rid of all that woke nonsense, but like, you don't want to like replace it with like its inverse, like its negative image, like, absolutely. And that's exactly what will happen. Like, I feel like it will happen if people let it happen. Like if it is, like you say, people base their tastes based on other people, like the in-groups sort of preferences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just I remember seeing recently this guy who I can't remember if I talked to Jeff about this. I don't want to repeat myself, but I just thought it like really highlighted something. I saw this guy recently on Twitter, and he had like he's an Irish, like a youngish
He's a
Irish,
geriatric
like,
millennial.
Yeah, an older millennial Irish guy who's trying to be a politician, right?
Okay.
And he had a picture of himself with the trans flag, and he tweeted it out, and it was something like, he was totally celebrating himself. Like, he was looking for like approval from everyone, being like, wow, you must be such a great person. And then I was like, God, I've seen that guy somewhere before. Who is that? And then I remembered him. He was like a students' union creature when I was in college. And he was a center-right neoliberal. He was the kind of person who would have thought anyone who has a radical opinion is just a loser, because, economic growth, we're all making money, everything's great. What are you doing with these, ridiculous opinions? Which is funny, because I would have been a radical leftist at the time. And now it's just like, okay, so then I thought, look, that guy is going to be in that role forever. Like, that is just the archetype of the person who naturally gravitates toward that role of like just enforcing what already is, and so maybe a backlash will come, and he'll just flip back to what he was when I was in college, so that neither one sort of gets at the fundamental problem when it comes to the creative block or whatever that we have now, and so it has to be that individual capacity to judge what is good. That is impervious, like, kind of in a way.
Yeah, and that's the point not the point, but that's what I guess Hughes is sort of modeling, I guess. Yeah.
The question that he kind of asks, like right at the end, I feel is really kind of core to what we're saying right now. Like, someone is already, and you kind of mentioned this format, someone is already making that kind of non-conformist art that's pushing through this flip back to conservatism from quote unquote wokeism. But I don't think that I know, I feel it. Someone is making it, but we're not going to know what it is for quite a long time. But I'm looking forward to that time in 20 years when we go, that Reuben Mackey, that book that he wrote.
God fucking help us.
Or not even not that book. That video game, that
TikTok that he made.
That TikTok.
I don't know. Just to play like devil's, it sort of extends on that point you just made, Rio. It's I don't think I love like prating on about this sort of, you know, how shit the culture is and that sort of stuff. But I think that is also kind of like nostalgia baiting as well. It's like most like mainstream cultures, even if it isn't like quite mainstream culture, is more often than not it is dog shit, right? Like throughout history, you can sort of like there are very few times where like the most interesting artistic works are the mainstream work. Like no matter what like sort of field it is. And Hughes he talks about that as well, particularly in that early modernist period, where like a lot of those figures, they did a lot of their best work when literally no one was paying any attention to them, and that was what enabled them to do the good work, right? And I think that like I don't think it actually really matters what the culture is doing, because we definitely exist more in a time now where like capital C culture is not culture at all, right? And it doesn't have the potential or the capacity to be culture. So I think in terms of you mentioned before that there isn't really like a sort of like a main sort of Philip Roth kind of figure who's like writing like that American Pastoral type book. And it reminds me that just the other day, my homeboy Joshua Cohen, of all people, won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, coming off the back of him in many interviews basically saying that the people who win the Pulitzer Prize, that's like the death knell in their careers. And Cohen writes the kind of fiction that should never win the Pulitzer Prize, so maybe that is a kind of a good thing. But yeah, like I feel like those official, usually in those like kind of official kind of like ceremonies of culture like that, you usually get like some recognition of like a really interesting kind of work, but very occasionally it might win something like that, but it doesn't really matter if it doesn't win it or not. The same goes for like bigger prizes like the Nobel Prize or whatever it is. Like it doesn't matter. Like these things aren't that important in the long term, and that there are actually, I mean, I think now like even like through something like Twitter, but also through things like Substack as well, there is a lot of really interesting writing. And I can imagine like a lot of really interesting art as well. That's not my area that's being produced at the moment, except that it's barely anyone is looking at it. And even the kind of people who are looking at it are like on the periphery. And there are a number of really interesting sort of like smaller magazines that are sort of propping up now as well. And I think that's where it should exist. Like I don't want art to get the kind of attention, that sort of mainstream attention. I think that would sort of kill it. I mean, it's what DeLillo sort of like Don DeLillo sort of ironically mentions in Mao too, where like the writer deserves to be on the margins, right? And then of course like ironically later on I remember reading this like scholarly piece on that quote where it's like he's just trying to appropriate the margins, like this white man is trying to appropriate the margins for himself. So maybe everything's fucked at the end of the day.
And you know, another feature of this period that I love, well, particularly the early bit, is like people were always producing manifestos.
Yes.
And creating little scenes.
Yes.
Now, scene is kind of a term that, you know, is often said, you know, in a way that kind of suggests like shallowness, or kind of like a like, you know, just like
groupie
like hipsters in Williamsburg or something like that. You know what I mean? It's usually used as a kind of an insult, but I think there's a good reason why scenes kind of produced really great stuff, you know, in the period that he's looking at, because I even know like from experience that if some kind of a milieu starts to form and somebody writes something really good or produces something really good and they kind of raise the bar, immediately everyone's sort of woken up like, oh, I want to make something that good. You know what I mean? And that like creative energy is like sparked within them. And so even if it's a small group of just like a dozen people or something, they are in a way competing with each other, and they're making art for each other actually in some way. I just feel like intuitively that's what's going on. And they keep raising the bar for each other, so that it just keeps going up and up and reaches these heights that nobody really thought of before. So I think that's usually the form that it does tend to take. While it is going to be on the margins and it is possibly out there somewhere, it's not really just going to be one individual on their own, or if it is, it will then be followed by other people who try to reach that standard.
It's like, smaller fragmented kind of communities, and it's when like the large community sort of takes hold of that it sort of self-reflexively becomes strange. It's like when modernism becomes like a general term is when it sort of dies, right? Because it just loses its kind of like power to actually be interesting anymore. It's like there's the German, I guess you'd call him like maybe modernist writer Gregor von Rosori, who wrote like the Memoirs of an Anti-Semite, but also like this really good book called Abel and Cain. He was definitely like someone who like fundamentally believed that the more general a thing becomes, the stupider it becomes or the dumber it becomes. And I think that's just right. You want those like smaller communities where you can have that much more like sort of fervent competition, right? What before it then becomes this like general, and then it becomes somewhat more commodified. It becomes so much more massified, and therefore less idiosyncratic, right? Because like all great art is at like some point it's that tension between the idiosyncratic and the tradition. Like the thing that you want to be general or to have some sort of general aspect is the tradition, not the contemporary. You want the contemporary to be the individual in relation to the tradition in some way. Once the present becomes the tradition, that's when things get fucked, basically.
Presentism.
Sense. Presentism,
yeah. Okay, so what do we think the main takeaway about modernism is with Hughes?
Modernism.
Do you think it's like pessimistic that it was like a failed experiment, or do we think it's like he's a bit more mixed with his view? Or
modernism is dead. Long live modernism.
Yeah, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean that is kind of what it is.
Yeah, it is.
Right? I mean it because it if you think of the early optimistic manifesto writing, like there is an earnestness to writing a manifesto, that it can only emerge at a certain time, and there's a life cycle of these things from that early period of like tremendous creativity to the inevitable sort of decline. I think the thing is like also it's not like you can really stop being modern either. You know what I mean? Like culture is still going to be massively impacted by the state of being in constant change and being forced into constant rupture and change through technology. Like we are still in that state, so the art forms of the future like are going to be essentially still modern, I think.
And I think that's I remember Will Self talking about this a lot, that what's kind of odd about particularly like contemporary literature, but I guess the same would probably be true about contemporary art as well, is that like functionally we still live in a modernist age, and writers don't want to sort of carry on the modernist challenge anymore. They sort of believe that it's no longer contextually relevant. And they try to sort of diffract it through trying to invent new terms like postmodern or post-postmodern or whatever the disastrous term you can think of. But the fundamental challenge is modernist, right? If the modernist challenge is particularly the rise of like automated technology, we increasingly live more and more in that world, or the extension of that world through like algorithms, through bidirectional digital media like computers, the internet. It's a logical extension of what begins in the modernist period, but just to the extreme point. and I don't think like writers aren't willing to sort of take up that kind of classical modernist challenge for the most part. They want to in a weird way revert back to, and this is like Sel's point, they want to revert back to pre-modernist forms of art to try and explain a modernist kind of period. So they revert back to realistic forms to a certain extent, at least in literature. I'm not sure about like what art is doing, but I mean, in some forms of like postmodern art are trying to do that as well, right? They're trying to do a kind of realism for a postmodern world. Like that's almost kind of what Andy Warhol is doing, right? And that kind of art.
Jeff
It's a kind of
Koons as well.
Yeah, it's a kind of realism, but it doesn't work. I don't think. It feels false. It feels kitschy, because it's ultimately reverting to techniques of that pre-modern modernist aspect where they can't quite figure out how to incorporate technology.
But also, there's also with that sort of art, there's always the built-in defense, which is like, oh, it's supposed to be false. It's supposed to be kitschy,
and I think like I think Self is like one of those writers who definitely wants to figure out that challenge, particularly that distinct connection between automated technologies, the psyche, and literary form. There's not enough like formal experimentation, I think, in terms of trying to tackle that question. And I think Hughes is right in thinking that that's the kind of like weird pseudo legacy of modernism, in that the true modernists that won in the end of the day were Henry Ford, not the actual painters or the artists, right? It's the technology won, art didn't win, right? And that's, I guess, maybe the sadder note to end on, right? We were all turned into machines at some point, and we couldn't figure out how to use art as a sort of psychic defense.
That's what the globalists want. So
it's what Hillary Clinton would have done to us.
Any parting thoughts, anyone?
This is Joe Brandon's America, everyone.
Joe Brandon. Any parting thoughts?
I think, isn't the final scene the one where he's on the stool in front of, or the chair in front of the Eiffel Tower? I love that.
It's such a great scene. Like he just sums it up completely. It's just so perfect. Like it's all, by the way, dear listeners, it's all available on YouTube. Not the best quality, but it's worth watching. Definitely go out and check it out.
Although also do ignore the fact that I found this quite interesting from a formal perspective. That if you read the more recent editions of the book version, at the introduction, there's like his normal introduction, and then right at the end of the introduction, there's this like postscript that he puts in there where he's like, "Yeah, look, I've realized that TV was really not the form to put this in, and the book is like the real version of it because you can't like there's an antithesis between TV and the appreciation of art." And I kind of, before I read that, I felt that the TV version was the more appropriate version of it.
Same.
It felt like very much like a modern attempt to grapple with these kind of issues. And there are many like very interesting like formal aspects of the show that I think just work a lot better than the form of the written word. It just felt kind of like an odd disconnect between the two. So in honor of Hughes, go out and buy the book or read the book instead of watching the YouTube video.
My only final comment is it doesn't matter which one you get; they're both beautiful. Maybe if critique can be art, then
that's what Oscar Wilde said. The critic is an artist. So
maybe blur your eyes a little bit.
Yeah.
If the smudges can be beautiful.
The true modern version of that, Matt, is the podcast as the artist in the digital age. It's like we're in the death throes of the Walter Benjamin's The Mechanical Reproduction of Art, right? This is the
well, I hope it's mechanically reproduced. We need those listeners.
All hail to the algorithm.
Yeah. Angela, did you have any final thoughts?
Not really. I mean,
No,
I just think that I think that passing of the TV form, the kind of brilliant survey course in a TV form, was kind of like what the BBC was doing at that time. They produced like the best stuff. I mean, in the history of television, I think. And it's a shame that I wish somebody would bring that back, because it was actually a really, really great format. And yeah, I mean, in the thing on Substack, I didn't say much about him. I was just kind of introducing him to, because I was amazed, like people I spoke to who, are interested in art and read a lot and stuff had not heard of him. Or they sort of had a vague, they thought they had heard of him, but they weren't sure. They hadn't watched this series. So I thought it would just be good to make sure everyone has seen it. But the one kind of thing I did touch on was this idea of him not kind of picking sides, I guess, in the culture war of his day, and that is often seen as like being a boring centrist, like, or people just like perceive it that way, like, oh, you're just like being too chicken to like pick a side in whatever the war of the day is. But he is doing something that what he's doing is kind of, as we already discussed, like trying to raise people's just abilities of discrimination, like, and ability to have the confidence to judge the aesthetic value themselves, and that is something that is beyond the petty squabbles of the day. That's like the big takeaway, I think.
Yeah, and it is sort of like he's not fence sitting, because he's so forthright. Like you can't accuse him of sitting on the fence, because he does have opinions, and he's not afraid to share them. So it's not like you can't really level that sort of centrist kind of
exactly.
Accusation.
It's sort of about like he's saying, like, I have my own standards of judgment, and I don't accept the ones that are being imposed.
Yeah. And you should too.
Yeah.
And then like the sort of the underlying thing that I think he sort of expresses more is like, disagree with me if you want, but the main thing is that this shit matters. And like that's the most important thing. And I think like the very fact that you can have that kind of like TV show as well is like probably more evidence of that. I mean, I imagine like that you get like some forms of that sort of stuff still in America. It's just kind of in a very different neutered kind of form. But you don't get that in Australia anymore, because no one cares about it. And it's maybe it's more of like a particularly Australian problem, and maybe this is one of the reasons why, probably the reason why Hughes and all those people left to begin with, is that we just don't give a shit here in this country. Like, in contrast to Ireland in particular, like we have 6-7 times population. We've got a tiny population anyway, but it's still way larger than Ireland's, and we're not producing the kind of like writers that Ireland can produce, because we just don't care as a country. We don't have that sort of like tradition. If we have a tradition, it's not even Australian. It's like it's British or European or something. We're just colonial suck-ups to the end of the day, right?
Well, I mean, I was talking before about the gatekeepers. A lot of the time, all it takes is like a very, very small number of people. I mean, I would be interested to see, if you go back and look at this kind of golden age of BBC that I'm talking about, I wouldn't be surprised if it was literally one person who had this idea, So it doesn't take a lot, it takes a kind of a visionary person in a role like that, a curator, a producer, a literary editor, whatever it is, who can be absolutely fundamental to changing all of that, And while Ireland does have a good literary culture, or it certainly produces a lot of literature, it also has that quality that you're describing, that you're saying is in Australia. Like, Ireland does tend to eject a lot of its like more I guess like non-conformist kind of figures, you know what I mean? Like like Joyce maybe would be a good example. And of course now everyone in the literary world loves Joyce, and but Joyce's values have become the dominant values to some degree. So that's why they're able to feel that way. But the same people would be just as happy to expel like an against the grain person today, you know? So, you know, there actually is a, Ireland does appreciate the arts, but it's very allergic to controversy. There's this strange culture where like anyone who would have even the inclination to think that like, you know, controversy might actually generate something interesting, or, you know, that they want to go against the grain in any way, they will almost always leave Ireland. And that writer Desmond Fennell like really nailed it when he was writing about Seamus Heaney. You know, there's an official culture which is like, we want to appreciate art, we want to appreciate literature, but we don't want any trouble. That's the general like feeling in the
ironic considering the Irish penchant for troubles, right?
Jesus Christ!
That's my one Irish joke of the day. But it's okay now, you know. After the Northern Irish elections,
we're leaving it there. Angela, thank you so much for joining us and talking about Robert Hughes.
Oh, thank you. It was so much fun.
Lovely. Also, go and subscribe to Angela's Substack, angelanagle.substack.com. Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Do that.
And buy her book as well.
And buy her book. Yes.
Very good.
Thanks.
We finish where modernism began, at the foot of the Eiffel Tower, and perhaps the etiquette now demands that I should try and prognosticate about what is coming next. Well, I won't, because I don't know. History teaches us one certain thing, that critics, when they fish out the crystal ball and start trying to guess what the future will be, are almost invariably wrong. I don't think there's ever been such a rush towards insignificance in the name of the historical future as we've seen in the last 15 years. The famous radicalism of 60s and 70s art turns out to have been a kind of dumb show, a charade of toughness, a way of avoiding feeling. And I don't think we are ever again obliged to look at a plywood box or a row of bricks on the floor or a videotape of some twit from the University of Central Paranoia sticking pins in himself and think, this is the real thing. This is the necessary art of our time. This needs respect. Because it isn't, and it doesn't, and nobody cares. The fact is that anyone except a child can make such things, because children have the kind of direct, sensuous, and complex relationship with the world around them that modernism, in its declining years, was trying to deny. That relationship is the lost paradise that art wants to give back to us, not as children, but as adults. It's also what the modern and the old have in common, Pollock with Turner, Matisse with Rubens, or Braque with Poussin. And the basic project of art is always to make the world whole and comprehensible, to restore it to us in all its glory and its occasional nastiness, not through argument, but through feeling. And then to close the gap between you and everything that is not you, and in this way to pass from feeling to meaning. It's not something that committees can do. It's not a task achieved by groups or by movements. It's done by individuals, each person mediating in some way between a sense of history and an experience of the world. This task is literally endless. And so although we don't have an avant-garde anymore, we're always going to have art.